Good morning, everybody. We're live here from the Birdhouse. It's December 18th today, and today we're talking about animal tracks, which is fitting because we are getting some snow here in Rochester. And so you might see some of these tracks if the snow sticks. You might see some of them tomorrow morning or possibly even today. And we are going to give some updates about some of the things you guys are seeing. A few people have sent in their photos, so we'll share those. And of course, we'll give you an update about the painted bunting. And I'm curious if any of you guys went to see it. If you could put that in the comments, that would be awesome. Or if you have any questions or just other bird sightings or wildlife sightings that you may have seen recently, absolutely put those in the comments as well. Or just say hi. We love to know who's on and watching. So you can always just say hi as well. So we'll get started here. So some of these tracks are going to be super common and you can find them year round. Some other ones are going to be from animals that are going to be hibernating right now, but I thought I'd put them all together just to kind of show you some of the differences in the tracks. So there's different types of tracks, of course, depending on what kind of creature has made them. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of mammal tracks. So mammals have different what are called gaits, depending on how they're walking. Are they just walking slowly? Are they trotting? Are they galloping? Are they jumping? So the tracks can look different depending on what the animal is doing and how they're moving. They can have different distances apart from each other. They can have different depths. Some of them could be really light in the mud or in the snow. Some of them could be really deep. So there can be some variation there depending on how the animal is moving. So we'll be talking about mammal tracks. There's also bird tracks. Birds will leave tracks in the snow and in the mud. Show you some of those. Herp tracks. So those aren't going to be anything you'll see right now, but herps are considered, those are going to be your reptiles and amphibians, and they leave different types of tracks than mammals and birds do. A lot of the time you can see their tail mark, so their tracks will look quite a bit different. So I'll show you a couple of those. And even insects, depending on what kind of insects are around, sometimes that they will even leave little tracks as well. So lots of different tracks. Today we're going to talk about mammal tracks mainly, with a few others thrown in there as well for good measure. So the format of this is I'll show you the track first and show you some of the different characteristics of each track, and then to tell you what animal has made that track. So play along, if you will, if you're trying to figure out what is making that track. Kind of have a little guess before the answer is revealed. So this is the first one, and this is going to be a really small, very, very small track, but you might see these underneath your bird feeder, for example. They are small, tiny little footprints with 5 toes on them. And the prints will be in groups of 4. So you can see the foreprints and the hind prints. And there's also the little tail mark. So you can see that there's a little mark here behind the prints from the tail. So you can tell this animal is hopping. It's hopping from place to place to place. And also, along with these footprints, you might see droppings that look like little black grains of rice. Well, those are not rice. Those are going to be droppings from your common white-footed mouse. So white-footed mouse, especially if you're by the woods somewhere, you might get some of these underneath your bird feeders in the evening. So look for their little tracks in groups of 4 and that little tail mark that goes behind them. You might just see some of these in your yard. A lot of you will find this one. This is probably going to be one of the most common, if not the most common track you'll have in your backyard, especially if you are feeding birds. And they tend to always be in this specific arrangement where the hind feet are above the forefeet. And so they're also in groups of 4. The hind feet are spread out and then the forefeet are in between the two, because this animal is jumping around and it's kind of in a V or a W shape formation. So you can kind of see that here. Super, super common here in the top left corner. You can see what it would look like in the snow, with the hind feet there in front, and then the forefeet kind of pressed down in the middle between the two. And this is a very common one because, especially if you have your bird feeders out, they're going to be in your yard all winter long, and that's going to be the gray squirrel. So really common print. This is one of the easiest to identify because they are so common. So this is a great print to study and to know and have in your repertoire, because once you start to learn some of the different tracks, you can kind of expand and start to learn some maybe more difficult ones. So this is a great introductory track, if you will, to learn. So this is going to be your typical gray squirrel, which I'm sure you have seen plenty of recently. So this is the gray squirrel track. Now here's another one that is going to be smallish, about the same size as your squirrel track. But if you look at the way that the prints are laid out, or the gait of the animal, it's going to be very different. They're not in that V or W shape like the squirrel print. These tracks are going to be about 1.5 inches long, and the feet look very similar to each other. So the forefeet and hind feet look quite similar to each other. They tend to overlap as well, and they tend to form zigzags. You will tend to see these also by the water. So look for these by any kind of wetland or a pond. And they have kind of irregular track patterns, and that is due to the animal's erratic foraging strategy. That is going to be the mink track. So if you look at the tracks of and the paws of this animal, the front and the hind feet look very, very similar. So different from the squirrel. The squirrel's hind feet look very different from the forefeet. Minks are kind of similar. Their forefeet and their hind feet. And minks, we do have them here. They're quite common, but they are pretty secretive. So you don't tend to see them very, very often, but there's quite a few of them around. They're ferocious predators. So they will go after lots of different animals. They tend to go after a lot of fish and animals that you can find in the water. But I've seen one go after a squirrel and drag it away before, which was crazy. So especially in the winter, as food is more scarce and maybe the water is frozen over, you might see them going out a little bit more, wandering out a bit more. So if you're by any kind of wetland or marsh, anything like that, keep an eye out for the mink. They are about the size of a ferret. So if you've never seen one before, if you see something that's almost looks like a small black cat, it could be not a cat, but a mink. They're going to be longer bodied, but if they're moving kind of fast, they can get mistaken for cats sometime. So that is going to be your mink track. Paws that are overlapping, very, very small, about 1.5 inches large. I thought I would add this one because this is an animal that's expanding in their range, and we've been getting reports here and there of people seeing them in places that you wouldn't necessarily have seen them maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's kind of a nondescript track. What's going to be the big factor of identifying it is going to be the size of the track, about 2.25 inches to 4 inches in width, and it has 5 clawed toes. One of the toes is small and set back, so sometimes you don't always see it. But the track itself, the front track is about 5 inches or so, and they tend to have this pattern of 2 in a row, then another 2 in a row, and another 2 in a row. This is from an animal called a fisher, and fishers are expanding in their range. And so I thought I would throw this in there. We had a report, somebody saw one in Greece a couple weeks ago, what they thought was a fisher. So probably was, they said it looked like a mink, but giant. So that's probably going to be a fisher, definitely expanding their range. So keep an eye out for them. You might just see them, especially if you're by any kind of wooded area. And so I thought I'd throw this in here too. This is a picture of a fisher den. So they do den in the ground. So you might see something like this if you're out hiking. Keep an eye out because you never know. You might just see the den of a fisher. They are around. Again, kind of like a secretive animal. You're not going to necessarily see them out and about in your backyard wandering around, most likely. But they are expanding their range, like I said, and you just might see them out. Now, this is another one that I think is kind of an easy one to identify because the tracks look like our hands almost. So if you were to take your hand and just shrink it down, that is what the forefoot of this animal looks like. So 5 clawed toes. A lot of these tracks, you can see some kind of claws. The claws can sometimes be tough depending on what medium the track is left in. Sometimes you can see the claws really easily. Sometimes you can't. The foreprints usually overlap with the hindprints, and their stride, so the distance between the tracks, are usually about 10 to 15 inches. And so if you look at those tracks here, they almost look like a human hand just shrunk down. And this is a raccoon track. And raccoon tracks, just like the mink, you tend to see these around water because raccoons do eat a lot of aquatic life. They eat a lot of fish in the spring and in the summer when they can find them. They'll eat tadpoles and that kind of thing. And they'll also wash their food. They tend to wash their food off before they eat it, which is another thing that they tend to do. So if they've gotten a meal somewhere else, they might walk over to the water with it and rinse it off before eating it. That's going to be why you'll find their tracks so often by the water. So that is going to be your raccoon track. So you can see the hind foot is going to be a little more elongated than the forefoot. But they do look like tiny little versions of our hands. So I think this is another pretty easy one to identify. Now, this one's pretty similar, I think, to the raccoon track as far as size goes and what it looks like. It almost does look like a hand, again, shrunken down, but it looks like the hand of a double jointed person. It's because if you look at the thumbs, you can see they're the opposable thumbs, and they're just kind of jutted out into strange directions. So here in the snow, you can kind of see that there's the track, and then the little thumb is really pointing out in a different direction than the other flanges in the track. So very similar to the raccoon, but with crazy thumbs. That's going to be your opossum, and opossums are around in the winter. Sometimes you can see that there's a tail track, depending on what the track was left in. In mud, you might not see it so much, but in snow, you probably would. And that's going to be your opossum. So they're known to feed underneath bird feeders, just like raccoons do, just like squirrels do. So whereas the squirrels you'll see during the day, you might have the tracks of opossum or raccoons over the evening. And now here's another one that you might see underneath your feeder. Depending on where you live, they can be pretty common. And again, another secretive animal, but they might leave their tracks overnight. Again, opposable thumbs you can sometimes see. Sometimes you can see them pretty clearly, sometimes not. The prints measure about and the back feet kind of look like small human footprints. So you can see those here. They almost look like tiny human feet. That is going to be your skunk. And here is a picture of what their track, the perfect track of the skunk, would look like. And it does look like almost like a little baby's foot. And it's got a strange little opposable thumb on it as well. So that's going to be your skunk track. And skunks are around all winter long. A lot of these mammals don't truly hibernate. I should mention that too. Whereas some mammals like chipmunks will hibernate for the winter. Bats are going to be hibernating for the winter. Bears, of course, do. But a lot of these mammals don't. Even if they go through some kind of dormancy where they are kind of in a burrow and they'll just kind of hang out there for a while, they'll still get up here and there throughout the winter and forage for some food. So some of these animals undergo something called torpor. It's not a true hibernation, but it's kind of everything slows down a bit. And even if they are undergoing that, they will sometimes wake from that and come out and forage and feed. So you might not see some of these tracks as often, like the squirrel tracks. You'll see all the time because they're super active all winter. Some of these other animals, are going to be more or less active depending depending on the time of the day and the time of the year. But you might just see them still in the snow. Okay, so here's another one that you'll find by water. And if you look close, it can be a little bit hard to see, but there are webbed feet here. So these are often found in mud, or you can find it in snow that's by the side of a pond, it's by a marsh, especially larger bodies of water. So look for those webbed feet here. And these are going to be a larger track than some of the other ones I've mentioned, about 5 inches long and 3 inches and for the four prints. So some of these prints are going to be quite large. And if you can see the webbing on it, and sometimes you can also see the tail marks dragging. That's going to be from your beaver. So that is the beaver track. And here when they show it in the snow, you can definitely see that tail dragging. But in the mud, you can sometimes see it as well here. You can see those little lines are from the tail dragging in the mud. Beavers are another one that you probably won't see too often in the winter because they're hiding out in their dens that they've made. But you just might, if they come out to do some foraging, see some of their tracks. This is another one that I think is a good basic track to learn, common in backyards. To me, it almost looks like a surprised face with 2 eyes here and then the nose and the mouth in kind of like an open surprised fashion. Always in this type of pattern where you're going to see the two tracks parallel to each other, and then two behind that, one in front of the other. So it always has this type of pattern, really common in the winter time as well as in the spring and in the summer. And you can see with the distance of the tracks that this is an animal that's hopping from place to place. So it's not like the skunk or the raccoon where they're actually just walking. This is an animal like a squirrel that's going to be hopping. So look for the clusters of the 4 tracks. They're about 1 inch round. Very round tracks, especially if it's in deeper snow. And the stride will depend on the speed, so it can vary a bit. But this is going to be your cottontail track, another animal that's going to be more active in the evening, so you could wake up to these tracks in the snow in your yard in the morning. But look for those 2 parallel to each other, and then the 2 behind those in that fashion. This is another common one. You might see these in your backyard. I know I get these tracks in my backyard. Maybe not something you want to see if you have bird feeders up. Now look at these little footprints here. One identifying characteristic of this animal is going to be no claw marks. So when you're looking at these little footprints, it can be hard to tell what kind of animal it is. But look closely, there's no claw marks. And no claw marks means that this animal either doesn't have claws or it can retract the claws. And that's going to be the house cat. So if you're trying to tell the difference, a cat print and a dog prints have claws on them. So if you think of your doggy, their claws are always out, whereas cats, they retract their claws and only put them out when needed. So they are not going to have their claw marks in their tracks because when they're walking, their claws are not out. So that's one way you can tell it's a cat track. Same with bigger cats like a bobcat, or if you go up north further, lynx, that kind of thing. They're not going to have claw marks in their tracks. So you can tell the difference between felines and canines by those by the presence of or lack thereof of the claws. So cat tracks, really common any time of the day, really. They tend to, I guess it depends on the cat. If it's an outdoor cat, when it gets let out or put back in the house. But you might see these tracks appear any time of the day, especially if you have bird feeders. They might be hanging around trying to pick off some birds. But really common. Size varies depending, of course, on the size of the cat, but they tend to be pretty small, like an inch, about an inch and a half or so for your typical kitty cat or a house cat. Bobcats aren't going to be super common here, at least in the Rochester area, but they are around, especially if you go a little bit further south in the state or around Letchworth. I know they've got bobcat there. But right here in the Rochester area, odds of seeing a bobcat track, pretty low. So here's another track, and now this one is not a cat because you can see the claw marks. So this is going to be some kind of canine track based on the shape and based on those claws there. This is a four-toed track, so you can count the number of pads there from the foot. So there's 4 toes there. It's kind of a V-shaped pad here. If you look at the pad, it's kind of a V and an inverted V. And the toes can be indistinct sometimes because the feet of this animal, they are covered in fur. The stride tends to be about 12 to 16 inches long, and this animal tends to, when it's moving and when it's walking, they tend to reuse where they just left off. So their footprints in the front, they tend to overlap the forefeet and the hind feet when they're walking. So their hind feet will go into the same spot that their forefeet were. So it usually looks like a little line here through the snow, kind of a straight line going through the woods. So you don't see the tracks. A lot of the times you don't see them kind of walking in a gait where you see both of the prints super clearly, like in this picture here, but they tend to overlap like this. So you see a little line going through the snow. So this canine is going to be your red fox, and red fox are very common in the winter. You can find them, especially by open fields. They can hear really well, so they can hear animals underneath the snow. Sometimes if you're lucky enough, you might see them hunting, and where they will listen, and then they will jump on their prey. They can hear, I can't remember how deep they can hear through the snow, but they can hear animals really, really deeply, even through the snow. A lot of small mammals will tunnel underneath the snow, and the red fox can hear those, and they will go after them. So look for little lines like this through the snow, not a straight line, but kind of a little jagged line, and that's going to be the red fox. Here's another canine track. This is going to be larger than your red fox track. Can overlap in size, but the track of this animal tends to be more elongated, and they can be 2 to 2.5 inches long in size, stride about 12 to 16 inches, and that's going to be your coyote. So larger track than the fox, but then they do kind of have that same pattern like the red fox, where they will walk in their the track. So their hind feet will walk in the track that their forefeet were in. So it can be a little difficult to tell the difference between the two, but the coyote track is going to be larger. And then finally, as far as canine prints go, here is another one. More of a rounded foot though, but you can see the toenails here. So you can tell the difference between this and a domestic cat because the domestic cat doesn't have those claw marks. This is going to be your typical dog, and dog tracks can be tough to identify because the size varies so much. So depending on the size of the dog, that can vary wildly. You can get a little tiny track from a 5-pound dog, or you can get a huge track from a giant, 100-pound dog. So size definitely varies. But as far as telling the difference between a domestic dog track and a fox track, the dog track is going to be more rounded in shape. So if you look at this fox track here, on the left, the toes are separated more, so it's going to have a wider kind of separation there, whereas the dog track tends to be much more compact and rounded. And this is one you might see around the area. Not right now. You won't really see these tracks in the snow. But if you're out, especially in the early spring when this animal is wandering, and they tend to wander in the spring, you might just see these. They can be about 6 inches long. So this is going to be a larger track than the others that have been mentioned here. To me, it almost looks like a small human footprint again, but a little bit more rounded. And size can vary, and the distance can vary between the tracks depending on the size of the animal and their stride. But this is going to be a black bear track. So not something you're going to find around here all too often. But in the spring, as they wake up from hibernation, or if there's younger males that are trying to establish a territory, they tend to wander around. So we always hear stories about that in the spring. Some of our customers even get them in their backyards here and there. They will sometimes come to bird feeders, unfortunately. Not an animal that we really have here all too often year round, but they do wander through the area. So you never know, you might just see some black bear track, especially someplace where it's muddy, where you can easily see the impressions there. So that is a black bear. And then another mammal track that is easy to identify is going to be this one. It's a hoofed animal, and we don't have too many of those here. So there really limits the number of animals. This could be two-toed hoof print, about 3 to 4 inches long, strides of 12 to 20 inches or so. Again, you might have these in your backyard, depending on where you live. That's going to be the white-tailed deer. Another animal in New York that would have a track similar to this is going to be a moose, but they're significantly larger, and we're not going to have those here in Rochester. But if you go to, say, the Adirondacks or so, you might see larger hoofed tracks. Those are going to be a moose. And let's move on to a couple more. That was the majority of the tracks. I thought I'd throw a couple of these in here too. You might see these. These are pretty large tracks, large bird tracks, about 4 inches long. You can see them in the snow. You can see them in the sand. They're here all year round. And they're surprisingly large. That's going to be your crow. So crows are a pretty large bird, and they have pretty large tracks. So if you see something like this in your yard, large bird track, probably going to be a crow. If you see something even larger that is about 8 inches, including this little hind toe here, this is another animal people get at their bird feeders and get them all year round. That's going to be a turkey. So turkeys, we hear all the time that they do visit and clean up underneath the bird feeders, especially in the winter. Turkeys eat a lot of different things year round. They'll eat small mammals. They'll eat salamanders. They'll eat amphibians. They'll eat grains and nuts. So they have a really, really varied and diverse diet. But in the winter, when certain food items are scarce, they'll come to bird feeders. So if you see some large bird tracks, about 6+ inches, it could be a turkey. And then if you go out towards the beach or any kind of body of water, you might see these little webbed feet tracks of a bird. Gulls, this is a ring-billed gull track. So ring-billed gulls, really common tracks that you can find by the water. If you see some larger webbed foot tracks from a bird that are more like 4 or 5 inches, most likely it's going to be your Canada goose, another super common bird to find by the water here all year. So you can find those pretty readily as well. And talking about tracks by water, this is not a track that you will see now in the winter, but if you were going out towards a marsh or towards a pond and you see these tracks where something has been walking and there is a line here that shows a tail dragging, that could very well be the track of a snapping turtle, especially when the females leave the pond to lay their eggs. A lot of the times they're just going to stay in their pond unless the pond dries up and they have to go find a new place to live. Really, the only time you're going to see a snapping turtle out of the water is it's going to be a female who's laying her eggs, and you don't want to mess with them during that period of time because they are quite nasty when they're out of the water because they are on a mission. But you might just see those tracks from the animal either leaving or going back into the water. So little footprints with the tail dragging behind it could very well be a snapping turtle. And a couple more. This is a kind of a zigzagged pattern. Not going to find it now in the winter time, but snakes. So snakes will leave tracks as well. So you can see their patterns here. It just kind of looks like, sometimes it looks like an S pattern. Sometimes it varies, but just a squiggly line like this, that's going to be a snake. And there's other reptiles that will leave tracks. Not so much here. You're not going to see these, but if you go further, a little bit further south, if you see tracks that are feet that are going, it almost look like they're swaying from side to side a little bit, and then there's a tail mark dragging behind it. Lizards, like this is a eastern fence lizard, it's called. So lizards will leave little tracks, especially in the sand. You can see those. So those are all the animal tracks I had to show you guys today. So a little bit of everything from mammals to birds to the herps, the reptiles and amphibians. Everything leaves some kind of track. So if you have questions, absolutely put those in the comments, and I'll give you guys a couple, the update here and share some of your photos that you submitted. First was the painted bunting. That was all the rage last week. That was the big birding news here in Rochester, that there was a male painted bunting in the area right here in Greece on Webwood Circle. And thankfully, the owners of the house were super, super kind, letting people come to see this beautiful, beautiful bird. So hundreds of people flocked out to see this gorgeous male painted bunting. It's super rare, not only because of the time of the year. If we tend to get weird migrants like this, a lot of the time it's in the spring when they're going north. Usually this bird would be going south this time of the year, and it just went the wrong way. But we're so far out of its range. It's so strange. The last time one was reported in the county was in 2015, and that was in the spring. That was in May, I think, of 2015. So if you look at this map here, the blue is where it tends to spend the winter. So its migration range, or where it migrates through to get to its breeding range, is this yellow area. And then the orange is how far north they normally go in the breeding season, which is going to be, May, June or so. They'll make their way up here. So really, really rare to have them this far north. Because you can see it's a bird that you can find in Texas, you can find it in Florida, along the coast, up through the Carolinas, you can find them there. But having one here was really unheard of. So as far as the bunting goes, it was all the rage. This picture was sent in by Randy, who's a frequent commenter on this broadcast here. He went out to see the painted bunting and was successful. And look at the crowd that it drew. So this was, I believe, on last Tuesday when the bird was being seen. A nice crowd. And these are pictures from the homeowner here. So you can see the painted bunting is here on the feeder. And here's a more close-up photo of the bird. Really, really gorgeous bird. Unfortunately, it seems to have left. So the last time it was reported, I believe, was on Wednesday. So there haven't been any reports over the past 2 days of the bird. So if you were lucky enough to see it, that is fantastic. It was here for about a week. And if it does reappear, if it starts coming back to the feeder, and if it's seen again in the yard, we'll let you know. But it seems to have moved on. Where it moved to, who knows? This bird doesn't follow the rules. It's a renegade. So who knows where the bird. But you never know. So it seems to be on the move. So keep an eye out at your feeders. You just never know. So beautiful painted bunting was a wonderful bird to have in the area. Some of you guys have had some sightings that you've sent in. This is a bald eagle that was seen over at Lock 32 right here in Pittsford by Mark, who sent in these photos of the eagle. So any kind of body of water, look for bald eagles this time of the year. They are going to be looking for some fish by any kind of open bodies of water. And then these pictures of bluebirds were sent in by Ed. He says, quite a surprise this past week when the bluebirds started showing up at our feeders again. They've they've been by 3 different days now, flocks of 4 to 6 birds each day. So it seems they may have become comfortable at our location. They don't scare too easily, but when they do, they're fast and gone in the blink of an eye. So Ed is having bluebirds coming to his feeders. Here's some nice photos of those bluebirds. If you are lucky enough to have bluebirds coming to your feeders, you might get them coming to sunflower hearts. I'm curious, Ed, if you're on what kind of food the bluebirds are coming to. Of course, they'll also eat mealworms. So in the spring and summer, we sell live mealworms. Right now, we've got freeze-dried mealworms that the bluebirds will eat. So that's part of their diet. They'll sometimes come to suet feeders as well. We've got a blend called Bugs, Nuts, and Fruit that bluebirds enjoy quite a bit because there's sunflower hearts in it. There's freeze-dried mealworms are in there as well. So we've got that as a loose seed or as a seed log you can get. So bluebirds will eat all of those things. They'll also come to heated bird baths. We get a lot of reports of bluebirds coming to heated bird baths this time of the year. And speaking of bugs, nuts, and fruit logs, it looks like that is what this pileated woodpecker is eating. You can see all the little mealworms in there if you zoom in close enough. This was sent in by Chris, and she says, first time seeing a pileated woodpecker on this feeder. She was gorging herself for quite a while today in the rain. So Chris has this wonderful photo of a pileated woodpecker eating from her seed logs. So this is, we've talked about seed logs in the past. That's these, they're almost like suet. If you've ever put in a seed cake in your suet feeder, something like this. These seed logs are very similar. It takes the birds a bit to go through them, so they're really popular, especially in the winter. If you don't want to go out and trudge through the snow to fill the feeder, these seed logs are awesome. They last a long time. So is where I have to fill my feeders every day. The seed logs will last more like a week or so, depending on how hungry the bird is. But it looks like that is coming to her bugs, nuts, and fruit seed log. So how do we know this is a female pileated woodpecker? You might be asking yourself. So the pileated females aren't going to have as much red on them as the males. So if you look at this woodpecker here, she's lacking a full red on the top of her head, from her bill to the back of her head. And also she's got a black mustache, if you will. The males would have a red mustache. So that's how you can tell the difference between the males and the females. It's not possible with every bird, but with a lot of the woodpeckers, you can tell the difference between male and female. So that is everything I have for you guys today. If you have questions, absolutely put them in the comments. If you were able to see the painted bunting, I would love to know that. We've got some people saying good morning. Good morning, everybody. Let's see, we've got some comments. Here's Ed, who had the picture of the bluebirds, these lovely photos here. He says, good morning, all. Thinking about the timing of the painted bunting showing up here in Rochester. Did it appear just after those tornadic storms that blew up the South last week? Maybe it got caught in those winds and was transported north in that weather system. Also wondering if it will head back to its native territory, or can it survive our winter and find the food it requires? All very good questions. Who knows? It could have gotten swept up in that system. I know it was, I'm trying to think of what day it was actually reported. It didn't get posted to eBird until I think it was last Saturday, but it had been here for at least a couple days before that. So it was probably last Thursday or so that it showed up, I want to say. So it had been here for a bit. So who knows if those storms did blow it in the wrong direction and it just continued on through that system. It's hard to say. I'm not too sure. Also not sure where it's been, to see if any other people report one, in the Northeast anywhere, because it could very well be the same bird. Can it survive the winter? That's a really good question. If it has enough food, possibly it might be able to. If it's coming to feeders, it's possible it could. Last year in the winter, we had an anhinga come through, which is a bird that you can commonly see in Florida. It's almost like a cormorant, but it, where it's like it'll hang out by the water with its wings out like that. But it's got a longer, kind of sharper bill. And that bird passed away, but that is a water bird. So it was really having trouble finding food in the water that it was by. And that bird, because it was going in and out of the frozen water so much, did not survive. But a bird like this that can survive on seeds and come to feeders quite often, it might very well be able to survive the winter here. So hard to say, but be interesting to see if it pops up somewhere else in the area. So Ed also says fishers are in the area. I saw one at Mendon Ponds Park a few years ago over near the Adnan Canale. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. So the fishers, he's talking about those guys. I saw one for the first time in my life this past year. I saw one in, it was down kind of towards like the Letchworth area, down further south there. But people are reporting them around here, kind of all over the place. Ed saw one in Mendon Ponds. I've heard people in Irondequoit announce that they've seen them. Greece just recently. So all over the place, people are seeing these guys. So really, really neat. It's like an oversized mink, like a big ferret. If you see one, if you see something that looks like that, that's going to be your fisher. So really, really neat. Really neat animal, expanding the range. Let's see. Randy says, hi, Ed. I seen the painted bunting last week. So Randy went to see the painted bunting. That was really great. I'm glad you got to see them. Lynn says, love all the pictures you've chosen. Thank you, Lynn. Let's see. Thank you. Randy says, good show today. Yes, photo looks familiar. Yes, Randy submitted his photo of all the bird watchers going to see the painted bunting. So it was a really, really fun outing, it sounds like, with the whole gang of bird watchers there. Vicky says, what a bird. The males are spectacular in color. Shy birds, though. Buntings in Florida love millet strains. Okay. So if you are a hopeful person, you could put out some kind of millet or sunflower hearts in hopes of attracting the bunting, because they will eat sunflower hearts are just a kind of safe all-around bird feed. Everything will eat the sunflower hearts. Everything that comes to a feeder really will eat the sunflower hearts, and it sounds like they also like millet. So you never know. Keep an eye out at your bird feeders. This bird is on the move. You might just happen to see it. You never know. Stranger things have happened. And Ed says the bluebirds at our house love the bugs, nuts, and fruit logs. They also go to the chickadee mix feeder and will forage on the ground under the feeders and suet log. All right. So Ed had the photos of the bluebirds, and those are the ones coming to his feeders, and that's what they're eating. So they're eating that bugs, nuts, and fruit log. Same type of food here that Chris has her woodpecker eating. So that's great. And then the chickadee blend that Ed is talking about, there's really something in that blend for any kind of bird that's going to come to a feeder. Sunflower hearts, peanuts, regular sunflower seed, safflower. So it's a crowd pleaser for the birds, the chickadee blend. So good to know that the bluebirds are eating that, and also the bugs, nuts, and fruit. And Randy says 2 chickadees yesterday in the front yard. So Randy's getting chickadees also in the yard. So that is everything we have for you guys today. Thank you, everybody who submitted your photos. It's always great to know what kind of things you're seeing. We'll be back on Tuesday with another broadcast, and we'll keep you informed. If the painted bunting happens to resurface, we'll let you know that or any other neat birds coming through the area. And until then, we are signing off. We are open all weekend. If you have some I guess it's not last minute. If you have Christmas shopping to do, I certainly know I do. So we'll be here from 10 to 6 today, which is on Saturday. We're open 10 to 5 tomorrow on Sunday. And we do have extended hours as well now through Christmas Eve, I guess. It's Monday through Thursday from 10 till 8. So we are open late. So if you do have to come after work or something like that, we will be open for you. So we're open Monday through Thursday, and then we're even open on Christmas Eve from 10 till 3. So if you have very last minute shopping to do, we're here for you. So we will see you on Tuesday, and